So Swami Yogatmanandaji asked me to do a talk, and he said I could choose the topic. So I said, what about the topic, what is important in spiritual life? And I think he thought that was too broad. So he suggested philanthropy, the Vedanta way. A while later, I asked him if the topic could be expanded to the Vedantic view of service. And he said the January calendar had already gone out, so it couldn't be officially changed, but that I could talk about service in the talk. He suggested that I focus on the books Karma Yoga by Swami Vivekananda, Service and Spirituality by Swami Swahananda, and the works of Erich Fromm, the 20th century social psychologist. As human beings, we need each other emotionally and for survival. Because we need each other, we seek to serve each other. The highest form of service in human form is said to be a mother taking care of her children because it is based on unconditional love. From tribal times, societies have been aware of the existence of a being or beings beyond the senses and have served gods or the one God. Initially, this is done to try to win favors from the gods or from the one God. Starting with Zoroastrianism, the idea arose of progress in the world to a state of perfection. This continued in Judaism, Christianity, and Islam. A Messiah will come and perfect the world. This hope has inspired the Abrahamic religions. In the modern age, the secular ideas of liberty, equality, and solidarity have been each viewed by different societies as a way toward perfection. Libertarians have viewed perfect competition in the economy as bringing perfection to the world. Communists have viewed perfect economic equality as bringing perfection to the world. Reactionaries, such as fascists and fundamentalists, have viewed perfect solidarity based on their version of their nationality or based on their version of their religion as bringing perfection to the world. Anarchists have felt that they can bring about a society with complete liberty, complete equality, and complete solidarity, bringing perfection to the world. So all these people are trying to serve in all their different ways. A perfect world can be called a utopia. When we serve others in the service of a utopia, we find peace in the view that total harmony will be achieved. All problems will be solved. Utopia provides meaning in life in that we feel we will be able to please everyone and be unconditionally loved by everyone. A religion that put forth a utopian ideal may fall under what Swami Vivekananda calls a comfortable religion. No utopia can ever work in practice because of the dual nature of the world. So that liberty has encouraged greed as people struggle for economic dominance. Equality has encouraged anger as people struggle for political dominance. Solidarity has encouraged pride or a feeling of superiority, resulting in anger and greed being directed toward the outsiders as people struggle for cultural dominance. And the different religious and political utopians end up fighting each other. So we have a need for both perfection and a need to serve others. If utopia doesn't work, does that mean that we cannot fulfill these needs? Will we remain forever unsatisfied? Why serve others if the world is a mixture of good and evil, pleasure and pain? Well, some people react to this situation by trying to live lives based on sex, drugs, and rock and roll. But this doesn't work either. Addiction may provide a temporary peace and relief from tension, but it leads to a greater anguish in the long run. Nihilists feel that if everyone is trying to do good in their own way and they end up falling short and fighting each other, then that God is to blame. So the only way out is to despair. This may seem like a bleak picture, but if you've been coming to the Vedanta Society for a while, you may suspect that I am going to turn it around and find a way out. And I am. Eastern religions, such as Hinduism and Buddhism, do not believe in perfecting the world, but in finding perfection by transcending the world. Transcending the world either by expanding the self to infinity and knowing that we are infinite, or by reducing the self to nothing and doing away with the material world, is attaining perfection itself. Hindus call it a state of existence, knowledge, and bliss. The world is not ultimately real, and only God is real. The reason we stay in the world and have flaws is due to the ego and its desires. Swami Vivekananda combined the urge to transcend the world with the urge to serve others. He said that we cannot perfect the world, but by serving others we purify ourselves. Most of us cannot just sit and meditate all day. By serving God and humanity, we aim to bring out the divine in both ourselves and in others. Serving people by fulfilling their physical and intellectual needs both purifies the giver and paves the way for those served to fulfill their spiritual needs. The one serving does not view the one being served as helpless, but as God, him or herself, involved in the play of the world. We are all merely pulling the wool over our own eyes. People serving other people as God allows both the one who is serving and the one being served to embrace their divinity. One's attitude in serving is important, so that humility leads to purity. And this is upside down. Why? It's an extra page. Okay. Swami Vivekananda, who is known as Swamiji, said, quote, "Feel from the heart. What is in the intellect or reason? It goes a few steps and there it stops, but through the heart comes inspiration. Love opens the most impossible gates. Love is the gate to all the secrets of the universe. Feel, therefore, my would-be reformers, my would-be patriots. Do you feel? Do you feel that millions and millions of the descendants of gods and sages have become next-door neighbors to brutes? Does it make you restless? Does it make you sleepless?" In Karma Yoga, Swamiji says that we don't ask for anything in return when we do something for our children, and we should take that attitude towards everyone. We must expect nothing from anyone. Swamiji tells the story about the mongoose, half golden and half brown, who is looking for a sacrifice as great as the family who gave away their food, even though it meant starving to death. Karma Yoga means to help someone even at the point of death, or even when we are repeatedly cheated. The life of true work is as hard as or harder than a life of renunciation. And now I want to share with you a video entitled "Give Love" by MC Yogi about what is important to give when we give to others. It may at first sound like a love song between a guy and a girl, but listen carefully to the words as the song goes on.
Hush, little darling, don't you cry. Every little thing's gonna be alright. Don't worry, don't be afraid. Every little thing's gonna be okay. Open up your heart, unlock the cage. Turn the key and break the chains. Love will always find a way. If you want love, you gotta give love away. Give love, give your love away. Give love, don't be afraid. Give love, give your love away now. Give love, it'll be okay. Give love, give your love away. Give love, give your love away. Give love, give your love away now. Give love, give your love away. Love is life and life is living. Living is love and love is giving. When we live for love, it gives life meaning. When we live to give love, there's no greater feeling. This feeling of kindness and love's inside us. Nobody can sell this or try to buy this, cause love is priceless and it guides us, lifts us up and ignites us. Love can bind us and remind us. Love has no limit cause love is timeless. Hate and fear will try to blind us, but love unites us. Nobody can fight this cause love is righteous, and it might just save the whole world from this global crisis. Just throw your hands up if you know what the time is. Open up your heart and let it shine the brightest. Give love, give your love away. Give love, don't be afraid. Give love, give your love away now. Give love. give love with generosity, giving consciously and constantly. When we all give love, there's no stopping. We just open up the door and let your love pour. When you open up to love, you can never be poor, cause there's always more inside the core, way more restored than you can bargain for. An infinite supply for us to share, so just throw your hands up in the air, wave them all around the atmosphere, show the whole world how much you care. We gotta give everybody love and respect, cause what we give is what we get. Come on, always remember, never forget, what we give is what we get. Give love, give your love away, give love, don't be afraid, give love, give your love away now, give love, it'll be okay, give love.
Okay, thank you. So when we do good to others, it tends to reinforce us to be good. And when we do evil, it tends to reinforce us to be evil. Karma must bear its fruit, yet all action contains both good and evil, even as we kill microbes when we speak. Most people think that there will come a time of all good and no evil, but that cannot be, since good and evil are two sides of the same coin. When we do good to others, the point is to forget ourselves. The ultimate self-abnegation is absorption in the impersonal God. Struggle will cease when life itself has ceased. The ideal of Vedanta is that we can reach God by different paths, generalized as work, love, psychology, and knowledge. The impulse of everything in the universe is to aim for freedom, including both good and bad actions. Morality preaches unselfishness, or freedom from the little self, eventually reaching the infinite. The personalist will attain the infinite, but does not follow the outcome of his path to the logical conclusion. Swamiji says, quote, "That which is selfish is immoral, and that which is unselfish is moral. One action may be selfish in one set of circumstances or in one country, and may be unselfish in another. We are afraid to give up our little personalities. Karma Yoga is a system of ethics and religion geared to attain freedom through unselfishness and good works. No belief in God or any metaphysical speculation is necessary for the Karma Yogi." End of quote. We cannot add either happiness or pain to the world. We just push them from side to side. We seek equality, and seekers of equality are among the sincerest fanatics. Yet creation requires disequilibrium or inequality. The aim of people for equality is necessary in creation too. Some work leads to freedom and some to bondage. The goal of making the world a totally happy place is good for fanatics, but fanaticism leads to evil as well as good. When the idea of doing good becomes part of our being, we will not seek any outside motive. Every good thought we send out to the world without any thought of return makes us purer and purer. Prophets of God have seen themselves as either incarnations of God or messengers of God, but the Buddha cared only about doing good and not about theories about God. He worked without personal motive. He taught that people should reason things out and not believe them because he said so. The Buddha was the ideal karma yogi. Swamiji is noted for presenting the ancient philosophy of Vedanta in terms that are both practical and suitable for modern people to understand. He had a multifarious philosophy, embracing love, knowledge, working psychology as the four yogas. And Swamiji's emphasis, especially for monks, was on karma yoga, or the yoga of work or service. Swamiji felt that giving spiritual knowledge is the greatest help to people because it is the only thing that can help us permanently. The world is always changing, so what we have now in the world we can always lose tomorrow. But God is unchanging, so spiritual knowledge leads us to a place where we lack nothing and need go no further. After a spiritual service comes intellectual service, or giving people secular education. Below that is giving people physical service. Swamiji said that we may have great asylums in charity, but people will still be miserable until their character changes. Swamiji felt that by doing good to others, we really help ourselves. because it is God who does good to the world and not us. By doing good to others, we purify ourselves. Does that mean that Swamiji ignored the physical needs of people? Swamiji said, it is futile to preach religion amongst the impoverished people without first trying to remove their poverty and their sufferings. It is for this reason, and to find some means for the salvation of the poor in India, that I am now going to America. So that's why we're here today, because he came to America. Swami Swahananda says that by service, Swamiji included all types of social action for the all-round social welfare. Social reform and social work are all included in his doctrine of service. He says, Swamiji had a mother's heart. At the sight of suffering, he would be overwhelmed. When a famine was raging in Bengal, and his assistants were in doubt if they would get enough money for conducting the relief work, he seriously thought of selling away the Bellarmont property, which he had just purchased. So intense was his feeling. And that was where the main monastery of the Ramakrishna order ended up being built. According to Swamiji, the whole field of moral science is based on the unity of existence. And all types of service have this idea of unity as their philosophical basis. The same idea has been expressed in all religions through the saying, love thy neighbor as thyself, or do unto others what you would have them do unto you, the common advice of every faith. Swami Swahananda says that Swamiji coined the word Daridra Narayana, God in the form of the poor, and asked us to serve him. Swamiji said, where should you go to seek God? Are not all the poor, the miserable, the weak gods? Why not worship them first? What is the relationship between spiritual liberation and service to humanity? Swami Swahananda says that while Swamiji was impressed by the social work of the modern type and admired the power of organization and their techniques, his original inspiration is rooted in Sri Ramakrishna and in Hindu tradition. It is characteristic of Hindu thought that in every age there was a dichotomy between knowledge and action, between jnana and karma, and their ultimate reconciliation had to be made. In the Vedic age, the conflict arose between sacrificial rites and spiritual wisdom. Sri Krishna reconciled both ritualistic and secular activities. The Mahabharata gave the story of the butcher and the pious wife who by sheer performance of their duties got knowledge. With the rise of Shankaracharya, superiority of knowledge was firmly established over ritualism. Swamiji reconciled work and knowledge in the modern age. Some people see a disparity between the thoughts of Sri Ramakrishna and Swamiji. For Sri Ramakrishna, the man of realization in the fullness of bhakti and jnana, once spoke disparagingly of karma. Swami Swahananda says that once, when Krishna Das Paul, a noted social reformer, said that doing good to society was the principal duty, Sri Ramakrishna retorted, God alone can look after the world. Let man first realize God. Let him get divine authority and be endowed with his power. Then and then alone he can think of doing good to others. Therefore, it is argued that according to Sri Ramakrishna, all work is an obstacle, and if at all work is to be done, it should be done after realization. But it has been pointed out that the doctrine of service, an essential teaching of Swamiji, is only another version of the doctrine of the harmony of different religions and paths. Whatever pushes a man forward towards final realization is religion. When we look at the life of Sri Ramakrishna, we find that he gave direct support even to the physical type of service. He himself exhorted Mathur Babu, his caretaker, to feed the poor in Deogar during a famine. Sri Ramakrishna physically felt the pain of a boatman who had been beaten, and of green grass that had been trampled upon. The specific conversation that gave Swamiji his idea of service to God and man is recorded in the book The Life of Swami Vivekananda. And this is a quote. The conversation drifted to the Vaishnava religion. The master gave the gist of the cult of Lord Gauranga and finished by saying, this religion enjoins upon its followers the practice of three things: relish for the name of God, compassion for all living creatures, and service to the Vaishnava, the devotees of the Lord. Hardly had he uttered these words, compassion to all creatures, when he fell into samadhi. After a while he came back to a semi-conscious state of mind and said to himself, compassion for creatures, thou fool, an insignificant worm crawling on the earth, thou to show compassion to others. Who art thou to show compassion? No, it cannot be. It is not compassion for others, but rather service to man, recognizing him to be the veritable manifestation of God. Everyone present there heard those words, but none but Narendra could gauge their meaning. Narendra became Swami Vivekananda. When Narendra left the room, he said to the others, service of man, knowing him to be the manifestation of God, purifies the heart, and in no time, such an aspirant realizes himself as part and parcel of God, existence, knowledge, bliss, absolute. By realizing him in and through all beings, and by serving him through humanity, the devotee acquires real devotion. Swami Saradananda in The Great Master says, quote, if instead of having wonderful visions and experiences, you find yourself acquiring strength, know for certain that you are on the right path. And you will also have these visions and experiences at the proper time. Sri Ramakrishna said, do you think everything is gained when Baba Samadhi is attained? That's the experience of the infinite. Is it something very big? Know for certain that true faith and renunciation are far greater. While Narendra does not generally have these, but just see how great his renunciation is, how great his faith, and how great his vigor and steadfastness. Swami Brahmananda says, before you begin to work, remember the Lord and offer your salutations to him. Do the same from time to time while you are working and also after you have finished. Spend all your time thinking of the life, teachings, and commandments of Sri Ramakrishna, knowing in your heart of hearts that all the work you do is for his sake. And Sri Sarada Devi, the consort of Sri Ramakrishna, said, but it seems to me, my child, that the special feature of the Master's life is his renunciation. Has anyone ever seen such natural renunciation? Swami Swahananda says, as for social reforms, Sri Ramakrishna and Swamiji did not give so much stress. Their emphasis was on true religion. It showed how true religious life can be the liberating force, doing away with bigotry and selfishness, and also social evils, the effects of these dark forces. So they did not attack the evils of society directly, but wanted to purify the individual and social life by creating a genuine urge for spirituality. End of quote. Now, in the 20th century, Erich Fromm saw himself as standing up for individualism, which at the time he wrote was counterposed to the authoritarianism of fascism and communism. Fromm feels that true love is productive and rational. He emphasizes that freedom becomes a burden for some people who may resort to following authoritarian leaders. One of his books, in fact, is called Escape from Freedom. I have focused on that book as well as its sequel, Man for Himself, and on his later book, The Art of Loving. While Fromm agrees with Freud that we worship God out of a need for security and believes that we eventually go beyond that, he does see a difference between authoritarian religion based on obedience and mysticism based on experience. Fromm feels that on a social level, sadism and masochism play a role in society, particularly in authoritarian movements. To Fromm, sadism does not mean just inflicting pain on someone for the pleasure of it, but can also mean dominating someone because you believe you know what is best for them. Fromm feels that in medieval times, people were not as free, but they were more secure and not as anxious. They were not alone in the world as many modern people are. Fromm feels that John Calvin, the Protestant reformer's theory of predestination, led people to believe that if they were successful financially, that indicated that they were saved. Fromm says, quote, "The inner compulsion was more effective in harnessing all energies to work than any outer compulsion can ever be. Undoubtedly, capitalism could not have been developed had not the greatest part of man's energy been channeled into the direction of work." Fromm also feels that the individualistic relationship to God brought about by Protestantism was the psychological preparation for the individualistic character of people's secular activities. Yet what happened is that unlike medieval societies in which spiritual salvation was the primary goal of society, economic success became the main goal of society. Fromm agrees with Vedanta that the selfish person is anxious, greedy, fearful of never getting enough, and never satisfied. Fromm contrasts rational with inhibiting authority, and he says the relationship between teacher and student and that between slave owner and slave are both based on the superiority of the one over the other. The interests of the teacher and the pupil lie in the same direction. The teacher is satisfied if he succeeds in furthering the pupil. The more the student learns, the less wide is the gap between him and the teacher. And he believes that rational authority has its source in confidence, while irrational authority is based on power over people and on fear. Fromm points out that Hitler's main justifications were domination of other people is for their own good and the good of the culture of the world, and that the wish for power is rooted in the eternal laws of nature, and Hitler recognizes and follows only these laws. He himself acts under the command of a higher power, God, fate, history, nature. His attempts for domination are only a defense against the attempts of others to dominate him and the German people. He wants only peace of freedom. So Hitler put himself forth as praising unselfishness and taught that, in, quote, in the hunt for their own happiness, people fall all the more out of heaven into hell. So Fromm feels that humanity has been evicted from the paradise of having instincts guide our every move, and reason leaves us feeling anxious and alone. So we have a craving for this absoluteness. Fromm notes that in the book The Trial by Franz Kafka, that the book expresses the sense of guilt of a man who feels accused by unknown authorities and feels guilty for not pleasing them. Yet these authorities are so beyond his reach that he cannot even learn of what they accuse him or how he can defend himself. In The Art of Loving, Fromm says that we mostly see the problem as that of being loved rather than that of loving others. We assume that the problem in loving is having the right object rather than in having the faculty to love. There is confusion between falling in love and the permanent state of being in love. We have the mistaken notion, despite evidence to the contrary, that nothing is easier than to love. Fromm says, quote, "Love is not primarily a relationship to a specific person. It is an attitude, an orientation of character, which determines the relatedness of the person to the world as a whole, not toward one object of love." We live under the illusion that we are individuals, while all the while we conform to social, economic, and political trends. For example, we think we work of our own free will, whereas we are slaves to our passions. And he says, respect is not fear and awe. It denotes, in accordance with the root of the word respicere, to look at, the ability to see a person as he is, to be aware of his unique individuality. Respect implies the absence of exploitation. Excuse me. Brotherly love is love between equals. Meister Eckhart says, as long as you love another person less than you love yourself, you will not really succeed in loving yourself. Learning to love, like learning any art, requires discipline, concentration, patience, and supreme concern with mastering the skill. Discipline has to come from one's own will, and concentration requires learning to be alone with oneself without distractions. When discipline becomes a habit, it is missed if one stops practicing it. Concentration with others requires the ability to listen. To have an idea of patience, think of watching a child learning to walk. One must be sensitive toward oneself like a mother is with a baby. Swamiji exhorts us to have faith in oneself as well as in God. And Fromm says, to have faith requires courage, the ability to take a risk, the readiness even to accept pain and disappointment. To love means to commit oneself without guarantee, to give oneself completely in the hope that love will produce love in the loved person. Love is an act of faith, and whoever is of little faith is also of little love. And now, since the title of this talk was Philanthropy, I thought I might throw in a few words about philanthropy. Amba Choi, in an article called Hindus and Charity, says, charity is one of the four pillars of Dharma. Dana is the cultivation of generosity and charity, and it is a valued quality in Hindus. Many Hindu stories talk about the surprise rewards of feeding strangers and giving to beggars. Giving without expectation of praise, thanks, or rewards is one of the main interpretations of Lord Krishna's instruction in the Bhagavad Gita and acting without attachment to the results. Seva is a word meaning selfless giving and is a branch of many Hindu temple activities. Hinduism also has a long tradition of treating every guest as God himself. God has nothing he needs to do, yet he incarnates his avatars and suffers voluntarily to do good to humanity, and we need to follow his example. Padma Kupa, in the article Dhanam and Seva in December and around the year, this is published around Christmas time, says, quote, the fourfold pursuit of Dharma, and by the way, Dharma and Dana are two different words. Dharma meaning righteousness, and Dana meaning charity, I believe. So the fourfold pursuit of Dharma, Artha, Kama, Moksha is a key to a Hindu spiritual life. From this stems the concept of serving and giving to others. She quotes Dr. D.C. Rao, who explains the steps in a Hindu spiritual journey. Thus, the first step is to discipline the desire for material possessions, or Artha, and sense pleasures, kama, which is different from karma. This is done by firm adherence to dharma. By performing one's duty and cultivating qualities such as honesty, self-discipline, love, and compassion, the mind becomes less agitated by base emotions such as greed, anger, and lust. The second step in the Hindu spiritual journey is dedication to selfless service, undertaking all actions without focus on personal gain. This is known as karma yoga. Practice of karma yoga softens the personal ego by discovering the joy to be found in serving others and working as an instrument of God. John D. Levinson, a professor of Jewish studies, says that in Judaism, charity is equal in importance to all the other commandments in the Torah combined. Jews are exhorted not to oppress the stranger because they know what it was like being slaves in Egypt. Through the tithe and other Jewish practices, Jewish law makes giving a mitzvah or commandment or good deed and not an option. A verse in Proverbs says, he who is generous to the poor makes a loan to the Lord. He will repay him his due. Dudley Rose, an associate dean for ministry studies and a lecturer on ministry, says, for Christians, the role of charity is first built on the injunctions of the Hebrew Bible. But in the New Testament, Jesus' parables and actions also speak to the morality of charitable sentiments. In the Gospel of Luke, for example, an expert in the law notes the Hebrew Bible injunction to love thy neighbor as thyself, and asks Jesus, "Who is my neighbor?" Jesus responds with the familiar parable of the Good Samaritan. Through the parable, Jesus essentially tells his listeners, everyone is your neighbor, even the stranger by the side of the road. Those who show mercy obey God's law. Chris Berlin and Jocelyn Cesari, a lecturer in Islamic studies at the Harvard Divinity School, says that the best known form of giving in Islam is zakat, or almsgiving. This is one of the 5 pillars of Islam. In the days of Islamic Empire, it was institutionalized like a tax. In the month of Ramadan, where they fast all month, charity becomes even more important as a way of feeding anyone, that is, after sunset you can't eat and before sunrise, and not just Muslims. It is seen as a way of bringing about peace and harmony. And I'm running a little bit out of time, so in Buddhism, charity is not seen as a necessity but a voluntary act, and it increases one's own merit and is an antidote to greed or grasping of possessions. And in the Sikh religion, one of the institutions, this is Harpreet Singh of the Department of South Asian Studies at Harvard University, one of the institutions that comes out of Sikhism's ethical framework is the Langar, or free kitchen. The Darbar Sahib, known as the Golden Temple in Amritsar, Punjab, serves free food daily to 100,000 people, regardless of their status or religious affiliation. As a consequence, it is said no one in Amritsar has slept hungry in the last 4 centuries. There was an article in the New York Times entitled "Give If You Know What's Good for You." An experiment was done in which people with high blood pressure were given money. Some were told to spend it on themselves, and some were told to spend it on others. Their blood pressure was monitored. Much to the experimenters' surprise, the blood pressure of those who spent their money on others went down, while the blood pressure of those who spent it on themselves stayed the same. Similar results were attained in other such studies. So the article says that embracing the spirit of generosity may not only be heartwarming, it may be good for the heart. And recently, Mark Zuckerberg and Priscilla Chan of Facebook fame set an example by giving most of their money to charity. Other wealthy people have made similar contributions in recent times. And I have another video about Mahatma Gandhi which proves that you don't have to be rich to serve.